Hey guys, welcome to our podcast. My name is Jane.
My name is Kate.
And I'm Jacob.
And our hot topic of today is about how a man is as old as his arteries. We will be talking about our older population and nutrition. Did you know that the older population is the largest group at risk for malnutrition? There are about 79 million adults that are 60 and over in the United States. 16% of those adults, or about 12.6 million adults, are at a moderate nutritional risk. 6.4 of all older adults, or about 5 million adults, are at a high nutritional risk. So not only may older adults be uneducated on eating habits, but they also have some possible alterations as you just naturally get older. As we get older, we have an alteration in taste, and we also have poor digestion. Another difficulty may be chewing and swallowing because of the degradation of our teeth, as well as social isolation. As we get older, it's harder to stay in contact with people, and a big part of social events is eating and food. And we also may see some financial hardships in our older adults because life is getting more and more expensive.
To add to that, Jane, also as you get older, you lose a bit of independence, which kind of takes away the going to the store to make the meals that you want to make and finding the good foods that you know are healthy, and you can become reliant on fast food and things that relatives bring you as well.
Malnutrition increases risks of morbidity and mortality. As we age, we see the body's internal processes slow down. It is essential that older adults ingest the proper amount of macro and micronutrients to maintain healthy muscle mass, bone density, and gut health. This leads us to have some questions. More specifically, why is there so much malnutrition in these older age groups? And how can we decrease these risks?
One reason as to why malnutrition in older age groups is more prevalent is because of the lack of education on malnutrition. A cohort study done in Singapore measured the nutrient intake and prevalence of malnutrition risk in older adults. 57.3% of all participants scored 7 out of 12 for nutritional knowledge. 37.5% had a moderate nutritional knowledge level, and 5.1% had a low nutritional knowledge level.
If 57% of all participants scored a 7 out of 12, honestly, that seems like an F to me for nutritional knowledge and does not seem very high, and clearly shows a lack of education on malnutrition. So they compared the macro and micronutrients done in this study compared to the recommended dietary allowances, or the RDA. So on the bright side, majority of older adults met the RDA for protein, total fat, and carbohydrates. They also majority met their limits for vitamin A and C and their iron limits. On the negative side here, 68% of males and 57% of females exceeded the limit for polyunsaturated fats, monounsaturated fats, and saturated fats. And majority of older adults had a median intake of cholesterol within the recommended daily limit, so just okay. And about almost all of the older adults exceeded the limit for sugar intake, which is a big no-no. 50% of males and 44% of females had calcium intake lesser than 70% of their RDA, which is huge for our older adults. And a majority of our females met their fiber RDA, but 33% of males had inadequate fiber intake.
Wow, Jane, that was a lot of numbers. How does this actually impact people's lives? Like, does increasing education about nutrition really matter? What does it look like relative to their diets?
Great question, Jacob. Let me answer that for you, Jane. With a lack of education, we see unhealthy dietary habits being formed, such as portion control, misuse of cooking oils, high sugar and fat intake, and more convenience foods like fast food being incorporated into diets, which leads us to an increase in chronic diseases that pose a greater risk of disability and death among older adults, affecting their physical and mental health.
So, what does chronic diseases have anything to do with nutrition in older adults?
While not only are chronic diseases a problem, but with unhealthy diets come neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, and cognitive impairment. We have a few studies that show the differences between various diets and how they tend to impact our physical health. A study conducted by Ramy et al. Discusses the markers of a plant-based diet and how it relates to memory and executive function. The results of this study show that plant-based diets do in fact relate to better executive function and memory performance. While this diet pattern does relate to increased working memory in older adults, it seems to have a stronger connection to executive function, more specifically, the ability to complete cognitive tasks. Moreover, the plant-based diets help lower body mass index, also known as BMI. Lower BMI tends to be associated with better cognitive function, and the consumption of fiber and polyunsaturated fats relate to lower inflammation. Inflammation can have negative impacts on our physical health, as it can block nutrients and cells from reaching damaged muscle fibers. We see that meat consumption is related to higher inflammation. So, diets such as the Mediterranean, the DASH, or the dietary approaches to stop hypertension, and vegetarian are all low in animal proteins, but do supply high levels of antioxidants, phytochemicals, and tend to contain nutrient-dense foods, which in turn reduces risk of chronic and neurodegenerative diseases.
It's interesting you talk about that, Jacob, because I looked at a study that was investigating the associations between the intake of dietary animal protein sources and the risk of neurodegenerative diseases. So some of the findings that came about here looked at all of Parkinson's disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, and cognitive impairments, and how milk, yogurt, cheese, total meat intake, red meat intake, poultry, fish, processed meat, and egg intake were associated to those neurodegenerative diseases. So let's break that down a bit. So for milk intake, if there's a high intake of milk consumption, it is associated with a higher risk of Parkinson's disease, but it is not associated with an increased risk of cognitive impairment. For both yogurt intake and cheese intake, there was no significant association between them and Parkinson's disease. For a total meat intake, the highest total intake of meat was associated with a significantly reduced risk of cognitive impairment, but not a reduced risk of Parkinson's disease or dementia. For our red meat intake, there was no significant association with risk of Parkinson's disease, dementia, or cognitive impairment. For our poultry intake, there was a lower risk of cognitive impairment, but not with Parkinson's disease. And for our fish intake, there was a lower risk of Alzheimer's disease and a cognitive impairment, but not with the risk of Parkinson's disease. And there was a 28% higher risk of dementia for fish intake. For our processed meat, there was no significant association with our risk of cognitive impairment. And for our egg intake, there was no significant association with risk of Parkinson's disease or cognitive impairment. So study was incredibly important for our older adults and emerging older adults because we are only getting older, and that increases our risk of neurodegenerative diseases. It's important to note that dietary animal proteins increase or decrease our risk of neurodegenerative diseases, even though some seem to be contradictory, with increased risk of one disease and decreased risk of another. Knowing that what we are putting in our bodies and how it affects our long-term health is significant because the earlier you realize, the more alterations and modifications you can make to prevent neurodegenerative diseases as an older adult.
That's an interesting point found on animal proteins, Jane. I found a observational study done by Mao et al. Observing the impacts of 3 different diets and the HLMVF diet, which includes high intake of legumes, meats, fruits, and vegetables. This was found to be beneficial in reducing the occurrence of cognitive impairment and multiple types of chronic diseases. The HLMVF dietary pattern is characterized by high levels of nutrient intake, particularly protein from both plant-based sources such as legumes and animal-based sources like meat. It also features vitamin and mineral-rich foods such as fruits and vegetables. Similarly, I found a study by Lee et al., which talked about the positive impacts of protein. The study suggests that increasing protein intake is associated with a reduction of the progressive loss of muscle mass, which is commonly observed in older adults. This is particularly important for patients with multiple chronic diseases, as they often experience muscle wasting due to inactivity and other factors. Increased protein can preserve muscle mass, which reduces falls, fractures, and enhances older adults' overall physical performance. Protein also plays a crucial role in the repair and regeneration of tissues like skin, bone, and cartilage, which are commonly impacted by chronic diseases and aging. Protein is key in maintaining immune function, especially in older adults whose immune systems may become compromised. This study has shown that a diet including a variety of high-quality protein sources can reduce the likelihood of complications associated with chronic conditions. Older adults consuming protein from diverse sources can promote the diversity of gut microbacteria, which is recognized as an essential factor in maintaining health and preventing chronic diseases. Therefore, the HLMVF dietary pattern may play a role in maintaining muscle protein, improving immune function, reducing inflammation, and decreasing the risk of multiple chronic diseases and cognitive impairment in older adults.
Bouncing off of that, in older population groups, physical activity tends to be less common due to a multitude of reasons. One of those reasons being the social health of people in this age group. The Mediterranean diet originated in Mediterranean countries, where historically cultures place emphasis on the importance of company and friendship, as well as physical activity. These highlights especially come during times of eating. In fact, through studies of this diet, there's evidence to support an association between loneliness, social isolation, and a decrease in overall dietary variety. The Mediterranean diet consists of a high consumption of fruits, vegetables, nuts, whole grain cereal, legumes, olive oil, and fish. However, this dietary pattern is not the only healthy option. The DASH diet consists of a similar food consumption, but focuses on low use of processed meats, sugary products, and alcohol, as well as low levels of saturated fats, cholesterol, and sodium intake. Other diets, such as the calorie restriction diet, which focuses on a reduced number of calories but ensures adequate nutrition without malnutrition occurring, or a low-fat diet, which helps reduce the risks of cardiovascular disease, can be healthy alternatives for older populations that have unhealthy dietary patterns. Furthermore, the Mediterranean diet, DASH diet, and calorie restriction diet have all been shown to have beneficial effects on vascular health, as they focus on healthy amounts of calories through nutrient-dense foods. Another factor leading to health decline in older adult populations is lack of hydration levels. According to Professor Amelia Pape, a registered dietitian nutritionist, 1 in 4 older adults do not drink enough water, which can lead to constipation, impaired kidney function, electrolyte imbalance, and decreased cognitive function. It is recommended to drink at least 8 cups of fluid per day, as hydration decreases through sweat, exercise, and other environmental factors. Also, aging comes with a decreased thirst response and an increase in medication or health conditions that can impact how the body processes water. Some strategies to help increase fluid intake are improving the taste by adding fruit, keeping track of intake through a water bottle, and making hydration fun by personalizing a water bottle, a straw, or even eating food that is high in water content.
I want to go off of that by saying that I think older adults also oftentimes need reminders to continue being hydrated. So I would say family, caregivers, anything like that, keep placing water in front of older adults to remind them to drink. So what can we do to create healthier dietary patterns? Is it too late to change dietary patterns to increase individuals' health?
No, it's actually never too late to start creating healthy dietary patterns. There's actually a couple ways you can start doing this.
One way that we can start doing this is through meal planning. So something important about meal planning is planning in advance. So finding a meal that you might enjoy in order to get throughout the day or throughout your week. And finding those budget-friendly foods as well in order to incorporate our financially independent and financially struggling older adults, as well as considering preparation time. You can have a meal that takes as little as 5 minutes to prep, or it could take as much as 3 hours to prep. So keeping that in mind as well as keeping our calories in mind. So we talked a lot about making sure that we get all of our nutrients in as an older adult and keeping those calories in mind when we are planning these meals.
I think that's something that also goes along with all of those things that you named is having a routine, meal prepping and grocery shopping, all of that. I think developing a routine that keeps in mind a diet that you want to stick to can really help older adults stay consistent with their dietary patterns.
So there's a few government resources that we found online to achieve a healthy dietary pattern. One includes the Congregate Nutrition Service, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP, the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, also known as CSFP. There is also a home-delivered nutrition service, as well as child and adult care food program. All of these resources are great for our older adults in order to be able to create that healthy dietary pattern.
So that was quite the information dump that we just did there, but we just want to put it out there as a reminder to keep your nutrients and your diet and your lifestyle in mind when thinking about your future self, especially thinking about your body while it's aging.
It is never too early to begin creating that healthy diet, and it is never too late to begin that healthy diet as well.
And thanks for listening to this podcast. I'm Jacob.
I'm Kate.
I'm Jane.
And don't forget, a man is only as old as his arteries.